So, my name's Nick. I'm an artist, and I'm just gonna go over some work from like thesis to present. And just to give you kind of some background and stuff, I have kind of consistent ideas. However, like a lot of times, there's a big change in material or kind of like what it looks like with each kind of series I do. So it may be a little abrupt kind of change in work, but it's all linear. Reference that. So I'm gonna give you some quick references. You can kind of look them up on your own time, I guess. Mike Kelly, really cool guy. Really like him, weirdo, really strange person. Trent Doyle Hancock, he kind of makes his own worlds and stuff, like very, very weird. Again, he collects toys, like little action figures and stuff. Enjoy that about him. Latoya Ruby Frazier, she's actually from Pennsylvania.
Oh, I didn't know that.
But really interesting kind of photos about her family and kind of like this like weird kind of history of her town and stuff like that. It was an old steel mill town somewhere in Pennsylvania, I can't tell you when. But super interesting kind of person. Philip Gustin, he's kind of an older painter who basically was pretty, I saw his work really young and I was like really into it, and it's just very graphical, cartoony, and kind of really messy, and it has this like kind of like over-end like idea of anxiety with it constantly, and like something's going to happen, and there's these pinks that are so fleshy and bloody, and God, I don't know, when you see one in person, it's like, holy shit, like, that's a painting, you know? But then let's go to or something that's not. Oh yeah, Victor Mascow too, who is kind of a psychedelic kind of poster maker. He did a lot of posters in the 70s and 60s for like bands like Velvet Underground, and he was part of the underground comics movement. Really cool guy. Doesn't get a lot of like respect, I think. Like a lot of people know Robert Crumb, but this dude I think is like more OG. Yeah, comics and cartoon characters are a really big thing for me too, so I was really interested in the comics movement, and if you want to learn more about it, it's comics with an X at the end. It's pretty interesting. But I'm going to start with my thesis work, which is called Mourn. A lot of the work I deal with and kind of question is kind of just self-psychology, or this question of are you okay over and over again, and the studio becomes kind of like this reflective area of kind of like notes of diaries or things like that on the walls. And so there's kind of like these two kind of separate aspects to it. There's a visual aspect, and there's kind of a more conceptual / psychologic aspect to the work that happens in it. So I usually have a question of like more of a visual aspect question of like say shadow and light happening, and then I have a question of kind of like Mourn, which was talking about actually suicide and kind of just the different aspects of suicide and how that happens, and kind of the different areas or like the different kind of aspects you have. So, you know, someone personally affected from someone on the outside, you know, the different viewpoints, I guess. That's how I like to say it. Almost like a painting, you know, you have your different kind of perspectives and stuff. And so I worked on this series in two different kind of methods. One was carving with these kind of large foam figures and things, and using light as to show kind of the difference in light and line. And made kind of this work that was kind of these drawings I've been collecting of just kind of this constant kind of thinking like what happened. I had a friend who died, and so I was really kind of figuring out and kind of collecting these things and trying to figure out what they meant and stuff. So a collaging of them, like putting them on top of each other, trying to make sense of certain things. And then the other type of work I was working on at the same time were these kind of steel line drawings, where basically trying to take drawing into a different medium and really try to see it in 3D. Drawing in sense I do for like all throughout the work, so you're always going to see drawing through it. It's kind of the one thing that keeps everything in line, literally. But basically these are kind of these weird drawings in life. I wanted to see kind of where you can take a drawing, or where you can kind of take like an image like this and see how the background changes with the perspective of views. So kind of the difference between like, you know, having like a set view of like this work and how like the light is very concrete and sets it, and you can only see the image like that. With this one you can change and the background changes and everything. So this was kind of the series of work I was working on at the end of my like thesis, grad school, and then I got out. And I was still interested in carving and kind of still interested in the self-psychology. It's kind of like this kind of basic idea that I keep on going with. And so this was called Bad Mind, and it was a collection of works where I was interested in this kind of idea of medicine, or kind of, yeah, I guess like just general kind of psychotics or medicines of some sort that were basically like antidepressants and things like that are like used as like structures of like holding someone together almost, and you can see it as a way of bondage. And so I was curious about the idea of bondage in this way, not as a bad or good thing relatively, but as a thing that is something that like is around. So I thought about the chemical compounds and different types of actual knotting and things used in bondage. So it's a combination of the two. And the colors actually come weirdly enough from metro maps from where I grew up. I grew up outside of DC. So I don't know why. I was like, yeah, I like colors now. I never work in colors too. I'm really bad at it. So so yeah, I worked this kind of different kind of like kind of more aesthetic while. So if you look at one on the left, that one's called stigmatabond. Basically, it is the chemical compound for Zoloft, the kind of active ingredient. So if you look at like kind of like chemistry set thing, you know what I'm talking about? Yeah, sort of. Basically, it's the like active chemical that makes it kind of like neutralizes you going fucking nuts. And this is called a cat's paw knot. So the weird kind of combination of the two being used together is the idea of bondage, or kind of putting one's kind of like 1, 2 together. The other one is just a noose, but very aesthetic. I just like that. I think it's something that's always in the memory and stuff for myself. Kind of still haunted and everything, but it's kind of fun, kind of like playful. This is kind of like an earlier rendition of it. It kind of got a little bit darker and everything, where it was kind of like still thinking about this idea of like characters still in the work and stuff. I kind of took them out for this series, but this was a predecessor of that. Still dealing with like the drug I was using, bad like Celexa at the time, and this weird kind of nodding. Irish knots were also interesting and everything, but then they become like kind of racist if you go into it, so it's like, stayed away. Another thing that came up a lot in the work was actually the idea of a placebo and everything. When you're taking kind of like, when you're talking about like mental health and things like that, there's this idea of wellness, or this idea of kind of like, I guess like wellness or self-betterment and stuff like that. And you're gonna get a lot of kind of like snake oil salespeople who will try to sell you on these ideas of like placebo pills or like natural oils. No offense, like I don't, like, you may have them and that's cool and all. For me, I was like, nah, no thanks. And I was just kind of making this word where there's 3 ends to a knot or a rope and everything, which makes no sense, but entanglement, you know, it looks like it would make sense. And so like this weird idea of like, yeah, this is kind of like a farce basically. You're not gonna get any of this from the work actually looking at it either. I think there's a level of the person telling you about it, and there's a level of entertainment also that happens. So, you know, I think like aesthetics, again, there's 2 parts of the work happening. Then I moved on to another series of work, kind of again, ran away from that, again, with just drawing happening. It was called Wall Draw. This work was basically just about anxiety and this idea of just permanent anxiety. At my time of my life right there, I had no clue. I was fucking broke, like so broke, and just like I didn't know what to do next. And I was just in constant anxiety of like, am I gonna keep on doing art? Am I like gonna keep on doing like anything? And the only thing that really kept me going was drawing and stuff. But like, you know, and I got a little bit better and I got a little bit more like secure and stuff, but I really, really thought about like these drawings, and I thought about this idea of the permanence of anxiety or something. It was like more or less this kind of general feeling of like, anxiety is something that is never present in time. So like it is present, but it goes away. It's one of those things where it is like kind of like, you can never have it forever. You know, if it's forever, then it becomes something different. Anxiety is something that's waiting for something to happen, waiting for the worst to happen, everything. So it's one of these things where there is no permanence to an action like that. It's not like depression when you're sad for a while. It's not like fear where you can be feared for a while and everything. Anxiety just goes, it's just waiting for the next thing. And I wanted to kind of memorize or kind of have like, kind of build something more permanent based on, you know, I guess like trying to capture anxiety in more of a mental way, or like a way of like kind of insulating it. So these were kind of these drawings I made. made and everything during that time, and then I took them and I used, going back to kind of the first work with the drawings and stuff like that, made out of steel, using steel and plaster, making these kind of like 3D, kind of like off the wall pieces that kind of just stick out. So they're kind of still using like shadow and light, but it's a lot more just like figuring out this in a more permanent way. It's not a drawing you can throw it away. It's got some substance to it. It's heavy. It's kind of like there. It's permanent, you know. And I was also doing some paintings at the same time, you know, of like kind of the drawings. Again, really playing with kind of this idea. I never learned how to paint, so I was like learning how to paint at the same time. It was like kind of like, oh, okay, that's what oil paint all over you and stuff. And you're just kind of like, oh, okay, I can't use that. But yeah, kind of like working in series again in Noose again. It comes up again and again and again and again. So something that's always present and stuff. Yeah, I was very tired at the time. And these paintings are pretty big. They're like 6 feet by like 4 feet or 5 feet. So they're pretty big paintings and stuff. And then after that, I was getting a lot better. But then I was like thinking, after like going through such a bummer and everything like that, I kind of noticed like kind of a change, or like this change, and I think it was a change in medicines and things like that. But I also thought about kind of like this makes not a lot of sense, but I think I was just interested in this kind of like weird sense of like fake euphoric, or a fake euphoricism in a weird way, where it would like, yeah, I don't know how to describe it. It's basically like you feel euphoric or something like that because of some altered state, or like something outside of yourself doing it. So a drug, you know, an alcohol, or like any of those things, kind of substances that make you fake euphorics, and then going through your everyday like that at a certain level as this kind of weird psychedelic. And I thought about kind of like the psychedelic era, and things like acid and things like that, and Timothy Leary talking about kind of tune in, turn off, and just thinking about this kind of time where, you know, these were thought as like the way of the, like, I guess like the way of the future, like how to deal with things. And in reality, it's like kind of, you're just suspending the issues you have at hand, you know. These drugs are just used as escapisms, not dealing with the future. So I did a series based on this kind of washed out acid feeling I was having, and kind of making these weird drawings and stuff like that, and this color palette with kind of a washed out kind of vibrance, and making these characters of cartoons based on kind of 70s like comics, like Victor Mascow and Robert Crumb were pretty interesting to me at this time. So I was using kind of like them as a reference point and kind of bouncing around with this cynics at a bar, just like a, you know, idea of my friends at the bar, and we're just talking about problems, or just for a moment, just thinking about the time, and things of that nature. Converse, Daywalker. That's like literally just a reference to this thing called Keep On Trucking. You ever see it? It's like this like image of like this dude. He comes up again. Then I went into kind of another series on authority. I was interested in this idea of like authority, and I guess again like this idea of like kind of looking at authority at different lenses and everything, like accepted authority and given authority. In our lives, I think you have kind of like accepted authorities, like your mother, maternal or father figures, or mentors and things like that. You accept them, you know, they're not like bad things, however, they are authority figures. And then there's given authority like police and things of that nature. And I think it was just an interesting topic of like how do you see yourself in those, like the accepted authorities and authorities that are given to you. In this one, like bipolar, was kind of like a outside one, but the like idea of bipolar and everything, the ups and downs, the authority of who you're gonna let live, or let you, like who's gonna take control of you. And this is like an interesting kind of way of working, where I was carving into MDF and then painting on top like a print. So if you could imagine like a litho print or something, not litho print, but what is it called? A woodblock prints or something. I just carved like a woodblock and kind of painted on top of it. More dealing with the sketching and things like that, this weird kind of like psychology of power, going through notes of like thinking about like what's used and what's not. being down by power, like a breakdown of like understanding that power can be beat down. Another one that was basically kind of like weirdly feeling bad about yourself and vessels. I'm very attracted to vessels, something about it. I have a lot of relationships to like people and vessels. I don't know why I do, but it's something that I'm always kind of drawing and always kind of putting together and putting mouths on, almost like pumpkins at like Halloween time. And this is the work that is down in the show right now, down by the gallery, right?
Eckhouse, yeah.
Eckhouse,
that's
yeah.
the word.
You can't read, so it's hard. But this was kind of thinking about individuality and existential, and kind of dealing with this, I guess, idea of like yourself and time, and kind of like this idea of permanence in a weird way. So I was very curious about these marks. I would like walk around these floors all the time in Richmond. There's like these, you guys probably have buildings that are like hundreds of years old here too, I'm guessing, yeah. And so the floors have these crazy marks on them, just like tons and tons of like scratches. And I mean, like, I don't know, I work in a building or buildings that have a lot of those. And so I kept on looking at them and thinking about like the individual making those marks at the time and stuff like that. And just like the hundreds of people and hundreds of years that passed with those marks being made. And it's so crazy because it's like, you know, that's like so charged. It's like so many people have been there and everything. And so I was really curious about these like mundane marks that make up something like more interesting, like a history. And so I did some research, and I was really trying to find like a building in Richmond that had like kind of like a lot of stuff going on it. And I was lucky to find this one building called the Richmond Arena, which was this giant kind of arena that got torn down. Not a lot of people know about it anymore, but it was like where like all the basketball games were held, all the music. If you talk to some of the older people in town, they'll be like, yeah, I saw Leonard Skinner there and stuff like that. It's like, oh, cool. But it's really cool because they kind of just tore it down, and this guy named Paul just kind of took all the wood, and so it hasn't been touched. It's kind of like this really interesting kind of like time capsule of like the last action, because they have the last, like there's a full reference of like kind of what has happened there, and you can kind of even see certain moments and stuff. So like the last thing is a Hertz auto sale, and you can kind of see tire marks like from the tires from 1986 of when it was torn down there. So there's like this weird kind of history there, and I was interested in that like massive history and stuff. And then like, holy fuck, I'm one person, I'm an artist, like what the fuck am I doing and stuff? And you know, the artist makes marks and stuff. And I was having kind of a conversation about the individual making a mark versus the group making a mark and stuff, and the importance of one artist making a mark, and I guess the significance of that. And it became kind of this talk about existential and kind of like the larger moment and stuff versus like the individual. And I felt kind of weird. So what like was happening, I guess I'll give you a little bit of background on the process, was I actually carved all the images onto this, and I was embarrassed. I was kind of like, damn, why did I do that? Because I just kind of negated about like hundreds of people's histories and stuff like that, saying that I was more important. You know, I got to carve in what you guys just made scratches and stuff. So I felt embarrassed and I tried to cover it, but then at the same time covering it just made it look worse. And I realized it's like one of those things, it's like, well, as an artist, you are making those things, you know, you are saying that you are like larger. And so I was kind of like, I have to kind of embrace that at the same time. So there's a lot of kind of like going back and forth between being shameful of making marks and then being like, no, you have to embrace it. And I think you have to deal with that as art. Like, you know, this idea of like, am I more important than the other people around me, or am I just like the rest of them? You know, why do I get to express myself versus some other people do? Which is a hard question to ask for anyone, you know. But I think it's like, you know, there's a drive. You have a drive to do it, so it's like, of course you're gonna fucking do it at the end of the day. And so a bunch of this work has to do with that kind of feeling and everything, and different kind of like, think of a bunch of mirrors in an area, kind of all looking at you. So you're kind of just bouncing back and forth. So all the work kind of is bouncing. And so I was really interested in Bugs Bunny too. I thought he was a weird fucking character. He's kind of always running bunches, but then like, what if he was, I kept on thinking about him dealing with his own like death in a weird way, like just existential crisis of Bugs Bunny, where it was like, he's just like, he finally realizes like he can't make it any longer. So he's staring into like this void, which is like, I guess a cross, but didn't mean to make it. I meant to make it like this weird kind of symbol, but like, yeah, he's just kind of freaking out at that point. It's like only the back of his head too. You can't see his emotion. You can only just see like this weird still life of that, which I enjoy. And then this is him just entering the void, basically just embracing death, like, or his own death and stuff. Understanding that he would be part of the 100 marks later on and stuff. At the time too, I was thinking about kind of spiritualism and this idea of like, I guess like this idea of spiritualism and like the self and spiritualism in a weird way, or like the self and the individual. I grew up Catholic and stuff, and there's like a big part of like one individual as importance, and then the rest are kind of followers in a weird way. And I was interested in this idea of like when things become more charged. And one of the things was transubstantiation. It's basically when like a piece of fucking like toast and like red wine becomes like blood and fucking flesh, basically, from God. It's like, yeah, that's Jesus now and everything, and that charge and everything, and that change. I was so curious about that, like how, like, you know, and a group believes that and stuff. I thought that was so weird, you know, how you just change something. People just like constantly like, yes, that's it. Like, for me, it was like, I feel like this wood was the same kind of charge for it. You know, I was giving it like, it's just floorboards at the end of the day. But for me, it was like, no, this is like human history. This is like 100 years of like involvement. And a lot of this has to do also like with reflectivity, about like these general kind of ideas of like identity being lost in time and stuff. You know, as long as you go, you'll be lost at a certain point, unfortunately. So I was thinking about like, and I was thinking weird images of like, so like, you ever have those space boxes and stuff? You ever see those where it's like two faces? I was interested in that. I thought they were fun. Yeah, so transubstantiation of 100 years of scratches, you know, this weird way of like building up again. And then part of this was also at the same time, all this kind of like existential. When you're talking about this shit, it really just kind of fucks with your head a little bit, because you're like, damn, what am I doing? More than art does, because art definitely does do that. So at the same time, these works were happening with the same kind of idea, but they were more portraitures of kind of what was happening. So portrait of recovery, a portrait of struggle. Oh, and I don't have the last one, but there was another portrait of a breakdown and the void. But yeah, that's pretty much what I've been working on right now. Yeah, that's it. Cool. Thanks, guys.